the whole thing to watching someone perform and the interaction that they have with their group, the communication it's got you have a vibe. Your music has a vibe. You have a serious connection and communication with your
I can
trio.
talk about that if you like.
I would like. That's where I was headed with this. I want you to talk about it.
Sure. Okay. Well, one trio that I've played with quite often and recorded with is the pianist Misha Siganov,
Oh, yes, that's what
who
I'm talking
is
about.
an amazing, amazing pianist and composer, arranger. Yeah, his albums on Crisscross are like a must-have for somebody who wants to listen to modern straight ahead, where it's rooted in all the classic values that really feel and represent jazz deeply. But he's thrust us into like this new kind of way to hear the tunes, and he writes all these interesting arrangements and mixed meters, and
He's a
but it doesn't
beast.
sound,
He's
yeah,
great.
but it doesn't sound brainy. It still sounds fun and light and airy and swinging and all those things. So Misha is terrific. And then, the bass chair, on my CD is a really great New York City bassist, Thompson Nealand.
Yes.
But I also play quite often with a bassist named Tamir Schmerling, who's from Israel.
Okay.
Um, and, for me, it's funny. Like, I would say bass players, I love bass players who have that big, thumpy swing and quarter note, but who have the kind of harmonic freedom and knowledge to like interact, on that level as well. So there's like a really guttural swinging thing happening, but then there's a creative, maybe I don't want to say brainy or intellectual component, but it's definitely like where you're doing a lot of things either harmonically or rhythmically. And guys like Misha and Tamir, I mean, it's all going to work out great because and listen, I mean, I I love conversation. I mean, I love this, and this is kind of what playing music is like for me. It's like putting ideas out there, and I feel really blessed. And or rewind a little bit more. People may not know that I had a residency that's gosh close to 20 years at the bar next door at La Lanterna on Sunday nights, and and quietly I became the music director 2 years into my residency when the owner was interested in having jazz nightly. But I mean, as for me, having a trio gig every week in a listening venue, albeit a local and casual one, not super fancy or whatever, but the people who would come for the music or come to the place would come for the music, and they'd have their food, but they'd be really watching us and cue in. I mean, I love intimate conversations. I love that kind of thing, and for me, I always look for, if I'm looking to collaborate with other players or essentially call players for my gigs, I'm looking to see that they have like a big range, feel wise and harmonically, and yet that they're not people who are going to just come and just kind of play their solo and just comp. I mean, everything that I do with all the players who I've played with for the longest periods, it's all about conversation. It's my solo, but it's not really just my solo. It's a chance to
Right.
interact, and it's the bass solo. It's
Right.
not really just the bass solo. It's really like I can
Right.
get into an interaction with Tamir when I'm playing my romance, and I'm playing an A and I'm strumming like Pat Metheny style over the bar line rhythms, and Tamir's playing off of that. And so, yeah, I mean, it's
Yeah.
certainly been helpful to have a steady gig to be able to build those kind of relationships with musicians where you can get into that, on a snap.
Well, how did you
Everybody,
meet Peter? How did you meet those guys? How did you meet Misha,
you
for
know,
instance?
I may have met Misha years earlier, from the Augies days, but I think,
Wow, he's
when I
been.
first, yeah, and I don't remember the details of that, but I mean, I knew of him and I knew that he was a great player. And he went to Berkeley. Yeah, yeah, he was a Berkeley grad, and I think like the buddies who he runs with are like Alex Sipiagin, the great trumpeter, and Boris Kozlov, the great bass player,
Oh,
like Russian jazz mafia. They're all great
yeah.
players. So, but I
Yeah.
knew those guys, and I think that Augie's might have been the original connection. But then I would hear Misha playing with the great chromatic harmonica player Hendrik Merkens at Bar Next Door, and I was like,
Ah,
and so I was listening to them play, and I mean, I loved his. I got to know his playing really well because Hendrik and I also played gigs together. So then I was like, Misha, we have to figure out a way to play, and it's so interesting because, as I said, my father is a pianist, and typically when guitar players and pianists play, especially if it's an old school kind of vibe, like the pianist is like, guitar player, you're a horn. I'm the comping guy. I lead the rhythm
yeah.
section, and you're a horn. But Misha is not that kind of player and personality, and I'm the kind of person who says, hey, what if I took one of those lush arrangements of mine and I delegated it out to Misha and I to play together almost as an orchestra? He's open to that.
Yeah, you guys have a wonderful reciprocity, I think. Uh, I I didn't know of him before I heard him playing with you.
Hmm.
So, I mean,
Yeah, he's a find. He's really something. And
yeah, he
again, it's
really
so
is.
funny because most pianists would say, "Oh man, guitar player, don't comp for me. I don't, I have a comping hand. I don't need your help." But it's funny. Like since I play it with Misha in a drummerless trio, a lot of what I'm doing texturally and rhythmically is percussive, like filling a space, almost like that sound. And so then at times when Misha does certain rhythmic things, and I know his language now really well, so I'll start playing rhythms that are off of like the rhythms that if he's in threes or fives, I start kind of playing in the opposite part of the beat. It's fun.
Yeah, I think that's fun. I love working with a great drummer, but I also love working without them. And I work with Jorge, so I
Hmm.
just work with a saxophonist. But I
That's
remember
amazing what you
Junie
guys
Booth
do.
when I did a lot of work with Junie Booth, and I don't want to offend anybody who's listening, but he used to say to me, "Don't worry, Nessie, we don't need a drummer. We don't, nobody needs a drummer. We got it."
But you know what? Guess what? I have a different take on that. Drummers appreciate that because that means,
Yes, they can play.
drummers like playing with musicians who don't expect them to generate the time,
Thank you.
right?
That's right. I love that you
Then they
added
can do
that.
what they like to do, right? I mean, if
That's
they're
exactly correct, Peter.
if the drummer's tethered to like the beat to hold, because if like you're on that
Good.
tightrope, he needs to be your net constantly. A good drummer will do that for you. I mean, he's like, "Hey, I'm going to hold this together for everybody," but ideally, they
Yeah.
want to be free to converse like anybody
Thank
else.
you. Thank you for that. That was a perfect place to put that. You're exactly correct.
Yeah,
Exactly correct.
for sure.
Yeah. So up until we will get into the your illness that you experienced.
Mhm.
Up until that, how was the music going? What were you doing before we got into this COVID thing? Well, I know you said you started teaching more when we got COVID.
Well, yeah, I'll say this
But
actually, just about COVID. Interestingly enough, with so many of my musician friends who were predominantly performers were like hurting really bad. I feel very fortunate that because I not only teach, I love to teach, and I had videos up on YouTube that guitarists among like the niche of jazz guitarists seem to be well liked and known. I was in a position to develop that. So I mean, I just want to say that for me, in a strange way, COVID, not COVID itself, I mean, COVID is treacherous, but the experience of COVID really kind of helped me be more introspective and really focus on the details of my approach and playing and my approach. And also, like, I was always someone who was comfortable with like speaking online like this. And so, some people say, "Oh, I hate being on Zoom." I kind of like it because I feel like everybody's hanging out in their home and maybe they're wearing a sweatshirt, or t-shirt or whatever they're comfortable in.
yeah,
There, if it's perceived in a certain way, there's a certain intimacy to it that doesn't happen. Like when you show up at your lesson and you're sitting in your teacher's house and, "Oh, is it okay if I put my guitar case down here?" "Oh, no, no, sorry." It's like all of that stuff is like not there. So everybody's just comfortable. So before I say what happened before, I do want to comment that it's in a strange way, it's helped me kind of define myself as an individual and as a musician, and also helped create more intimate relationships with people. And I know that seems totally counterintuitive. Hey, you're on a computer with person. How can that be intimate? But like I said, if everybody's in their house, just kind of, and I'm just saying, hey, we're just here, we're just hanging out, and there's no candlelight, there's no jazz club, there's no ambiance. It's just being in the moment,
and being in your own skin too,
and being,
because the
yeah,
camera don't
exactly.
lie. The camera don't lie, and you can go back, as they do all the time now. They analyze every little, thing that you're doing on camera.
Right, right,
But there's another approach to that kind of thinking too,
right.
because I feel like some of the stuff I've seen kind of is like when the stage is missing, sometimes some of the glow is gone as well.
Right,
I love the
right.
stage, but I'm talking mostly about singers. Some of the magic is missing.
Yeah, if the magic is inside, it could still be there.
You would think so, right? You would
Hmm.
think so.
Yeah.
But sometimes it takes the stage as the other element that brings that out in people.
I do believe in context. Listen, I mean, there's that famous video on YouTube of Joshua Bell, the famous concert violinist. Like he did a thing where he went out into like the subways of DC or whatever it was, and he's just in a sweatshirt and a baseball cap playing violin.
Yeah.
And like they just wanted to see what would happen if this guy who was like a world famous violinist would play in a subway station. Like how would people react to it? And basically it was like what you'd expect. People walked by, they didn't really care. A few people stopped and said, so I do agree that context is important. I mean, I mean, you can be a concert violinist or a great jazz musician, whatever it is. And if people see you in the subway, you're just this kind of thing passing by in their day, so context is important, but I do like, and remember, I mean, the people who I'm hanging out with on Zoom, it's not just random either. I mean, these are all people who have sought me out or know each other. And a lot of people who are in my teaching workshops are people who have been recommended from other people who have taken my groups. So there's already kind of like a context, but it's just not really one where the setting itself is generating the output. It's still coming from within, and there is no pretenses or anything. And like, I guess, who knows? So when I play in a jazz club, maybe I'll feel like Superman because with all that ambiance, maybe some of the pressure will be off. Maybe I'll feel more comfortable playing in my living room, right? With my dog over there and my wife sitting on the couch,
Well, let's hope we get to a place where, this whole thing goes away and we get back to, well, I don't think it'll be the new normal. Let's just put it that way. We hope for the best. That's all I can say,
For sure.
Okay, now that it's the elephant in the room, obviously, I would like to at least talk a little bit more about what you've been going through.
Yeah.
I don't want to butcher the pronunciation of your syndrome.
I'll share it. Yeah. So I was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, and it's an autoimmune disease. It is curable. I'll cut to the chase for anybody who knows me and might be saying, "Oh, let's check out this interview with Peter," and then they fall off the chair when I say I have an autoimmune disease. It's curable, but it can be quite treacherous. And I don't want to make anybody paranoid. I mean, I'm not anti-vax, but they say it can be caused by vaccinations, not just COVID, flu shots, whatever, adverse reactions to vaccinations. It can be caused by something like COVID. And it can be, essentially, it could be, if there's a virus in your system that is not totally healed, it's dormant, and then there's other, things going on in your system, maybe it can result in, your body misinterpreting, and misreading various signals. And, in my case, like, what Guillain-Barré syndrome does is it attacks the body, thinks it's in distress, so it starts to attack itself. And for me, what that meant was, so I'm a husband, I'm a father. I have my beautiful wife who I met at Juilliard, who's an amazing classical pianist, and then our two daughters, Eliana is the older one, and Eliza. So and we have a little doggy named Mia, Dachshund. And it was like Saturday morning, like at like 4:30 in the morning, and I wake up out of a sleep, and my hands and my feet start feeling numb. And I'm like, gosh, that's weird. And feet were totally weird because that didn't make sense. But I'm like, okay, I sit really funny sometimes when I play guitar and I'm teaching my lessons on Zoom. I'm doing this, for 4, 6, 8 hours, whatever. So I thought, I must have a pinched nerve, maybe a compressed disc. Something is weird. So I tried to sleep it off 5:30, 6:30 in the morning, like 6 in the morning. I was like so uncomfortable. I had to get out of bed. So I snuck out of the house, our little apartment on the Upper West Side, and I went out. We have a little garden in the back of our building, and I started doing exercises, stretches. Let me loosen up and see, maybe I'm just tight and I haven't stretched. I do my various muscle groups in my body, and nope, it's still bothering me. So Saturday I was with my daughters while my wife was teaching, and my neighbors, how you doing? Oh yeah, I have this weird tingling in my hands and my feet, and maybe I pinched a nerve in my back, I don't know. So so I got through that day, and then Sunday it was my turn to teach online in the morning, and I picking up my guitar. Man, this feels so weird. My hands are like almost asleep and tingling in my feet. But my class was. I said, yeah, I have a doctor in my class who's at Johns Hopkins. I was like, yeah, I got to go to the doctor to get this checked out. Something weird must be going on for my playing. Monday morning, I wake up and it's worse, and I'm having a little trouble moving around. So I try not to freak out. My daughter goes to school on the east side, so I take her on the bus over to the east side. And do I want to go to the emergency room? I feel a little too freaked out. So I say, no, you know what? I'll go to a City MD on Lexington Avenue, check in, just see what they say. So sure enough, 79th Street and Lex, see the doctor, the walk-in doctor. Yeah, you're bright, you're responding well, and you can speak, but your symptoms are quite strong. You should go to emergency room. So I walked 2 blocks to Lenox Hill because it was the closest hospital. I have a typical New York emergency room experience of being there 6-7 hours. And basically they come to me at the end of this whatever, and they say, listen, you didn't have a heart attack, you didn't have a stroke, go home and call a neurologist. And I said, what do you mean go home? I mean,
oh my God.
It? So, okay, so I kind of hobbled out of there, and I was having trouble. I was feeling heavy on my feet, and anyway, got myself an Uber and got home, and I called the neurologist who they suggested, and this was in April. Nearest
Oh,
appointment, August.
oh,
So I'm like,
come
okay, that
on.
doesn't feel right. So then, I called my stepmother because, my father, my recently deceased father, died from Alzheimer's, a long fight with Alzheimer's. His neurologist, a brilliant neurologist, lives in their building. So I said, would you be willing to call him on my behalf and just, see if he would talk to me? And she put a note under his door. Within 10 minutes, he called back. He's like, listen, he's not my patient. I haven't seen him, but I think he has Guillain-Barré syndrome, and he should go back to the emergency room and insist on seeing a neurologist and ask if he can be tested for that. So I had been to an emergency room that Monday, and I was like, okay, I'm going to wait it out till Tuesday morning. I'll get my daughter to school. And the Weill Cornell emergency room where this neurologist practices, is not far from my daughter's school. So I said, all right, I'll do that. Tuesday morning, it wasn't happening. I went to the emergency room in an ambulance to Weill Cornell, and my
Oh,
daughter,
Peter, that's
yeah,
something.
yeah.
Oh my God.
So I 12 hours in the emergency room. They did ultrasounds on my
Oh,
legs to make sure I didn't have clots. They did CT scans on my head and on my chest and, various areas of my abdomen, nothing, then the doctor, the young guy, nice guy, a little bit of a hot shot. He's, oh, I'm going to give you a lumbar puncture. That means they're going to poke a needle in and get
I
speed. So
know.
he tried 3 times. He couldn't get that needle in my spine. Is this going to end or what? So
Torture, torture.
they put me down on a table in like an operating room setting with an X-ray, and they were able to get the lumbar puncture. And sure enough, you can't test for Guillain-Barré syndrome, but what they do is they put together all your symptoms. So I had this neuropathy. So this was no longer tingling. This is now referred to as neuropathy, which means it's numbing and tingling
Yes.
from nerve dysfunction, right? And my feet as well. So then the results of the lumbar puncture came back, and I had these elevated proteins, and that's like a telltale sign that they use as a marker for Guillain-Barré. So then from there, so now it's like I'm going to stay in the hospital. My wife is home alone with my 2 kids. She teaches at CUNY, so she's teaching college. She's teaching at home, and then no concerts in COVID. She gets called for 2 high-paid chamber music concerts that week, so she's learning a ton of chamber music. She's calling me every night in tears at the hospital. This is so hard, and I miss you, and all that stuff. And I'm like, wow, So then I was in the neurology unit getting a rigorous IG treatment, which was like immunoglobulin. It's human
Yes.
blood that they've reconditioned to be like provide healing factors for people with illnesses, right? So I got this rigorous treatment, couldn't eat, couldn't drink, was like throwing up. And because and the neuropathy was so strong, Nora, that I felt like I was plugged into like a strong electric current and getting like electrocuted through my shoulders, into my hands, into my legs, into my feet. And because of the lumbar puncture, the lumbar puncture itself didn't hurt, but there was a wound back there because they make a hole in your spinal cord to like
I
take fluid
know.
out. So I was awake for a week. I did not sleep for a week, and they were giving medicine for me to sleep to try to override it, and it wouldn't work. So I'd end up with the shakes. I'd be
Oh,
6 hours a
Peter.
night. I was crying in bed, just shaking, and they couldn't give me more medicine because they weren't allowed to overdose me right on meds. So that lasted about
Yeah.
a week, and by the last day, Nora, I just cried for 3 or 4 hours straight, and that was the best
Oh,
thing I could do. I felt
oh
better
my.
after that. Let me tell you. There was a guy next to me who had, cancer in his stomach. He had obstruction, and he was the nicest, most chill guy. This guy was looking at the end of his life potentially. And when eventually I was moved to acute rehab, where I met MS patients. People who were going to be, guaranteed living with a lifelong illness that would be, probably take them out earlier than they would like. So yes, I did have a treacherous experience. Oh yeah, and so but I should say by the 3rd day of being in the hospital, I couldn't walk. I lost everything. So and let me say something that I hope is inspiring. It was inspiring for me. If I was going to look at my experience of being ill and being in the hospital through the lens or through the perception of who I was going to be a dangerously depressed person, an angry person. But this was really like one of those moments, Nora. I can hear you saying this. Like if I called you on the phone, you'd probably give me this advice. What I was telling myself, life is now my improvisation. It has dropped me on this map, albeit a treacherous and remote part of the
Yes.
map. But it is my job to accept this place and to find my way back by being open to it. And I made so many friends in the hospital. I knew all, aside from the doctors and the nurses, I knew all the aides. I knew the people who, cleaned my bathroom. Turns out the guy who used to change the trash in my room saw the guitar. Hey, you play guitar? What are you into? I'm jazz. Oh man, I love jazz. So I turned him on, and he was saying, my favorite track is Freddie the Freeloader from Kind of Blue. So you know what I did? I took the John, I said, hey, you got to hear this, man. There's this John Hendricks recording where it's like him, Al Jarreau, Bobby McFerrin, and George Benson, and they all sing the solos with words. You got to hear this. I'm with my walker kind of dancing around the room, and he's like, dancing around the room. We're high-fiving,
Yes.
So, in a strange way, some beautiful things happened. Another thing, the last thing I'll say is like, my wife, children are not up because of COVID, are not allowed up to see people in the rooms. And my father-in-law came from France to help take care of my family. And so my father-in-law, my wife, and my two children were waiting outside the hospital, hoping that I could come down. But there was no one to take me down in my wheelchair, and I wasn't allowed to wheel myself down. So my wife came up and she was crying. She was understandably upset. And interestingly enough, there was like a pregnant nurse or a pregnant doctor. She was taking her break, and she said, you know what, I'll take him. And then there was another woman who was overhearing the conversation, who was actually a gurney driver. She was, who does transport, who moves patients around. She was getting off her shift, said, no, I'll go with you. So the two of them came down and pushed me down to out front of Wild Cornell. And there's like, as my daughter is running towards me and my wife is waving her hands with the baby strapped to her chest, both the three of us, the two people who are helping us and me, start crying, and everybody's looking at us like having a moment, so there was some beauty in there too, for sure. And a lot of kindness from the PTs, from the doctors. And it was a very difficult experience, but it was also very uplifting in a way, because once I said I surrender,
There
it made
is.
me available for all this love.